Welcome back, brave souls, to another spine-tingling episode of Luna's Crypt, where the eerie and strange are never quite what they seem. I'm Luna, your guide through tonight's chilling tales of love, death, and the curse of forever. In this episode, we explore two haunting themes: the kiss of death, where love's final embrace lingers long after the heartbeat fades, and the curse of immortality, proving that sometimes eternity is a fate worse than death. Tonight, I've unearthed 4 sinister stories from the crypt, just for you. First, we set sail into the mist with the widow's kiss, where one young man learns that some legends are more than just stories, they're deadly. Then, the Immortal's prison will show you the price of a wish for eternal life, as one man learns there are fates far worse than death. Next, A Lover's Last Breath tells the tale of a love so passionate it pulls one lover closer to the grave with every kiss. And finally, we close the crypt with The Curse of the Mirror King, where an ancient ruler's reflection hides more than just his image, it holds the dark secrets of immortality. So, lock your doors, light a candle, and settle in. Welcome to Luna's Crypt, where not every kiss is sweet, and not every curse can be broken. The Widow's Kiss. In the small, fog-draped town of Blackwater Bay, there was a tale that everyone knew, but no one dared to speak aloud, except when the sea whispered too loudly against the cliffs, or when the fog rolled in so thick that even the lighthouse couldn't pierce through it. The legend was of the widow. She was said to have drowned long ago, her name lost to time. A grieving woman who wandered the cliffs, waiting for her husband to return from a voyage that never ended. Some say she waited too long and threw herself into the churning sea below, while others claimed she was pulled in by something unseen, dragged down by the weight of her sorrow. But one thing was always the same. On the darkest, foggiest nights, sailors lost at sea would spot her, a figure dressed in black, her face pale, her eyes hollow, and her lips as cold as the depths. Those who kissed her were never seen again. Their bodies would wash up on shore the next morning, lips blue as the tide that claimed them. Old fishermen warned their sons, but not everyone believed. Tommy Briggs certainly didn't. He was young, proud, and reckless, traits that often came before a fall in Blackwater Bay. "I've seen the widow," he boasted one night at the pub, a smirk on his lips as he nursed his ale. "Out there in the fog, near the cliffs. But I wasn't afraid. I didn't run like the others." The men around him shook their heads, muttering in their beards, but one old sailor leaned in, eyes sharp as broken glass. "If you see her again, boy, you'd better run. The widow's kiss is colder than death, and sweeter than you can imagine. Ain't no man ever survived it." Tommy laughed it off. Superstitions were for old men, not him. He was strong, quick, and daring. He had no fear of ghost stories. The next night, Tommy went back out to the sea, the fog rolling in thick and heavy around him. His boat cut through the mist like a blade, the waves lapping softly against the hull. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her, a woman, standing at the edge of the cliffs. Her dress was black, her veil fluttering in the breeze. Her face was pale, lips a deep red that looked almost painted on, too vivid against her deathly pallor. Tommy's breath caught, but not in fear. No, something about her drew him in. He docked his boat and climbed the rocky shore, the cold wind biting at his skin. The closer he got, the more he could hear it, the low hum of the sea, like a whispered warning, but he paid it no mind. The widow turned to face him as he approached. Her eyes were hollow, but her lips, they curved into a smile. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost inviting. Tommy's heart raced. He stepped closer, mesmerized by her beauty, his mind clouded as if the fog itself had slipped inside. She reached out a hand, ice-cold fingers brushing his cheek. "Kiss me," she whispered, her voice like the pull of the tide. Without thinking, without even resisting, he leaned in. Her lips met his, cold as winter's breath, and in that moment he felt everything: love, loss, sorrow, and a darkness deeper than the sea itself. It was sweet, so sweet, that he could almost forget the cold creeping into his bones. But then his body began to tremble. His breath slowed. He tried to pull away, but her grip was iron. When she finally let him go, he staggered back, his lips blue, his breath shallow. The widow smiled again, her eyes glinting with something ancient, something wicked. "You'll be with me now," she whispered, and as the fog swallowed her whole, Tommy fell to his knees, his heart slowing, until there was nothing left but silence. The next morning, the townspeople found him washed ashore, lips blue as the frozen sea, his face twisted in a smile. They said nothing, only nodded solemnly as they pulled his body from the rocks. Another foolish soul claimed by the widow's kiss. And so the legend continued. In Blackwater Bay, it was always the same. The fog would roll in, the sea would whisper its warnings, and still, men like Tommy would chase after the widow's kiss, only to find that some loves, once lost, should never be found again. The Immortal's prison. Centuries ago, in a forgotten kingdom nestled deep within a sprawling mist-covered forest, there lived a man named Edric. He was not of noble birth, nor was he particularly remarkable. What set him apart from the rest of the kingdom's inhabitants was a single, unshakable desire to escape the cruel hand of time. Edric was a scholar, obsessed with the idea of immortality. The passing of years, the steady march of age, terrified him to his core. He watched as his friends and family withered and died, while he, too, could feel time's relentless grip tightening around him with every aching joint, every new wrinkle on his brow. His obsession led him to the farthest reaches of knowledge, into the deepest, most forbidden tomes of magic and alchemy. He spent years poring over ancient manuscripts, whispered of only in rumors, where rituals of eternal life were spoken of in half-forgotten tongues. No sacrifice, no price was too steep for Edric, for what was a soul compared to eternity? One fateful night, in the depths of his study, Edric found it, the secret to immortality, hidden within the pages of an ancient grimoire. The spell was dark, more ancient than the stars themselves, a ritual so twisted and forbidden that even the bravest sorcerers had feared to attempt it. But Edric was undeterred. He performed the rite without hesitation, drawing strange symbols on the floor, muttering incantations in a language long dead. As the final words of the spell slipped from his lips, the air around him thickened, turning cold, still. The flames in the candles flickered wildly before extinguishing altogether. Silence, deafening and absolute, descended upon the room. Suddenly there was a presence, something dark and ancient. A shadow, barely discernible in the gloom, materialized before him. The air felt heavy, pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. The figure was tall, draped in a cloak as black as the void, its face hidden beneath a hood. Its voice was like the creaking of ancient wood, deep and hollow. "You seek eternity," the figure rasped. "Are you prepared to pay the price?" Edric, trembling yet resolute, nodded. "I'll pay anything." The figure's unseen eyes seemed to bore into him, considering, weighing his soul. "Very well," it whispered. "But remember, mortal, eternity is not without consequence." With a sudden, bone-chilling gust, the figure vanished, leaving Edric alone in the darkness. But something had changed. He could feel it in his bones, a strange warmth spreading through his body. His heart, once fluttering with fear and anticipation, now beat steady and strong. He felt powerful, ageless. Days turned into weeks, and Edric saw no signs of aging. His skin remained smooth, his strength undiminished. Years passed, and while those around him grew old and died, he remained unchanged. At first, it was everything he had dreamed of. He watched kings rise and fall, wars rage and end, all while he remained untouched by time. But as the years turned into decades, the world around him began to shift in ways he hadn't foreseen. Edric found that he could no longer form meaningful connections with the people around him. Everyone he knew, everyone he loved, would inevitably die, while he remained. He watched countless generations wither away before his eyes, their faces blurring together in his memory. He moved from town to town, changing his name, his identity, to avoid suspicion. But wherever he went, the same pattern repeated. He would make friends, build a life, and then inevitably he would be forced to watch them fade away. Soon, the fear of loss kept him from forming any bonds at all. He became a drifter, wandering aimlessly through the centuries, untethered and alone. As the loneliness grew, so did his bitterness. The world, once full of promise and wonder, became a cage. Every new city, every new century, felt like a mere extension of the same prison he had built for himself. He realized, too late, that eternity was not a gift, it was a curse, and the true horror of his fate was revealed the day he tried to end it. It had been nearly a century since Edric had last tried to connect with anyone. By then, he had learned to guard his heart completely, to keep all others at arm's length. But the weight of centuries had become unbearable, and he sought the only escape left to him. In a moment of despair, he climbed the tallest cliff overlooking a roaring sea. The waves crashed below, wild and unforgiving. Without hesitation, he stepped off the edge, welcoming the fall, the end. But it didn't come. The impact should have shattered his bones, should have ended his misery in an instant. But Edric stood, unharmed, as if the rocks had been nothing more than soft earth. He tried again, this time with a blade to the heart, then with fire, poison, drowning. Nothing worked. Each time his body healed itself in moments, his flesh knitting together with an unnatural ease. That was when he realized the full extent of his curse. Immortality wasn't just about living forever, it was about never being able to die. Centuries passed, and Edric's madness grew. He wandered the earth as a shadow of his former self, seeking any means to escape the endless cycle of life without death. He ventured into the deepest, darkest places of the world, searching for something, anything that could free him. One fateful night, in a long-abandoned castle deep within the mountains, Edric came across a strange, ancient mirror. Its surface was black, like the void, reflecting nothing. Desperate, and with nothing left to lose, he stepped in front of it. The shadowy figure from that long-ago ritual appeared within the glass, its hollow voice echoing in the chamber. "You wished for eternity, and eternity you shall have," it whispered. "There is no escape from time, no freedom from the curse you begged for." Edric screamed, pounding on the mirror, but the figure only laughed, a low, hollow sound that reverberated through the room. "You are trapped, Edric, in a prison of your own making. And now, you are mine." With a flash of dark light, the mirror's surface rippled, and Edric was pulled in, his form dissolving into the void. To this day, it is said that in the depths of that forgotten castle, the mirror still stands, cold and silent. And if you listen closely, in the dead of night, you can hear the faint, desperate whispers of a man who begged for eternity and received an eternity of torment in return. A lover's last breath. It was a tale as old as time, a love that burned so bright it seemed destined to be eternal. At least, that's what Alara believed when she first met Jonas. The small village where she lived was nestled on the edge of a sprawling forest, where the trees stood ancient and tall, their branches twisted and gnarled. The villagers told stories of spirits lurking in the woods, of strange happenings after dark, but Alara never gave them much thought. She was a young woman with dreams far beyond the village, and she longed for something more, something exciting, something passionate. Jonas arrived on the eve of the harvest festival, a stranger whose presence felt almost too perfect, like something out of a dream. He was tall and handsome, with dark, soulful eyes that seemed to see right through her. From the moment their gazes met across the crowded square, Alara felt an undeniable pull, a connection so deep it sent shivers down her spine. They spent the evening together, dancing beneath the stars, laughing and talking until the fire in the square burned low. There was something different about Jonas, something mysterious and alluring. He spoke in a voice that was soft but carried an intensity that made Alara's heart race. She found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. It was as if fate had brought them together. As the days turned into weeks, their love blossomed. Jonas would come to her cottage at dusk, and they'd spend hours walking through the woods, talking of everything and nothing. He told her stories of far-off lands, of adventures and battles fought long ago, but always his voice had a tinge of sadness to it, as if there were secrets he couldn't yet share. Alara didn't care. She was in love, deeply, passionately in love, and for the first time in her life, she felt alive. Jonas was everything she had ever dreamed of, and with him, she felt safe, as if nothing in the world could harm her. But there was something strange about Jonas, something that gnawed at the edges of her mind when she was alone. He never spoke of his past, never mentioned his family or where he had come from. And then there was his touch. It was cold. At first, she thought nothing of it. It was autumn, after all, and the chill of the season had settled over the village. But as the weeks passed, Jonas's touch grew colder, so cold it felt as though the warmth was being drained from her each time they embraced. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the forest, Alara finally confronted him. "Jonas," she began hesitantly, "there's something you're not telling me." He stopped walking, his expression unreadable as he looked down at her. His eyes, once so full of warmth, now seemed distant, like two dark pools of water reflecting nothing. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alara shivered, though the night was calm. "You've changed," she said, stepping closer to him. "Your touch, it's so cold, and there's something you're hiding from me. Please, Jonas, tell me the truth." Jonas sighed, his gaze dropping to the ground. For a long moment he was silent, and when he finally spoke, his voice was filled with sorrow. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said, taking her hands in his, "but I suppose I can't keep the truth from you any longer." He paused, as if searching for the right words, and then, slowly, he began to explain. "Alara, I am not like other men," he said. "I am bound by a curse, one that was placed on me long ago in another lifetime. I was once a soldier, a knight, who fought for a king in a war that was meant to save our land. But during one of the battles, I fell in love with a woman I was never meant to love." Alara felt her heart begin to race, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "She was the daughter of a powerful sorceress, and when her mother discovered our love, she was furious. She placed a curse upon me, one that bound me to death, but not in the way you might think. I am neither living nor dead, Alara. I walk this earth, caught between two worlds, and my curse is to steal the life of those I love." Alara recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. "Steal their life," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jonas nodded, his expression pained. "Every time I touch you, every time I kiss you, I am slowly taking your life force. It's why I am cold. My love is a death sentence." Alara's mind spun, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Jonas, the man she loved, was cursed, and worse, he was slowly killing her. "I should have left long ago," Jonas continued, his voice cracking. "But I couldn't stay away. I love you, Alara, more than I've ever loved anyone. But if we stay together, you will die." The air around them seemed to grow colder, the shadows of the forest closing in. Alara took a step back, her heart torn between the love she felt for Jonas and the terrifying reality of his curse. "Is there no way to break it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonas shook his head. "I've searched for centuries," he said, his voice full of despair. "But there is no way. The curse is eternal." Alara's mind raced, a mixture of fear and sorrow swirling within her. She had to make a choice, to stay with the man she loved, knowing it would kill her, or to leave him and live with the pain of a broken heart. But before she could speak, Jonas stepped forward, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I cannot ask you to stay, Alara," he said, his voice soft. "You deserve a life, a long, full life, free from this curse. I will go. It is better this way." He turned to leave, but Alara grabbed his arm, her heart breaking. "No," she whispered. "I can't let you go. I love you, Jonas. If this is our fate, then so be it. I would rather live a short life filled with love than a long one without you." Jonas looked at her, his eyes filled with both love and agony. "Alara," he whispered, but she silenced him with a kiss. As their lips met, Alara felt the cold seep into her, deeper than ever before. It was as if the very warmth of her soul was being pulled from her, but she didn't care. She kissed him with everything she had, knowing that each moment was a step closer to her last breath. When they finally parted, Alara's breath was shallow, her skin pale. She knew she didn't have long. "I love you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonas held her close, tears streaming down his face. "And I will love you for all eternity." As Alara's eyes fluttered closed, her last breath escaping in a soft sigh, Jonas held her in his arms, his heart breaking once more. For centuries, he had walked the earth, cursed to take the life of those he loved. And now, with Alara's death, his heart was shattered once again. But this time, something felt different. As he looked down at her peaceful face, he realized the curse had finally taken everything from him. There was no more love left to give, no more life left to take, and for the first time in centuries, Jonas felt truly alone. The Curse of the Mirror King. There is a legend whispered in the deepest, darkest corners of forgotten kingdoms, a tale that drifts on the lips of those brave enough to speak it aloud. It's a story of vanity, power, and the ultimate price one man paid for the illusion of perfection. Once, long ago, in a land veiled in mist and shadow, there was a king known only as the Mirror King. His real name had been lost to time, for all who spoke of him remembered only his obsession, not his legacy. He was a man of impossible beauty, admired by all who beheld him. His skin flawless, his features sculpted like a divine statue, his eyes a piercing shade of ice blue that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared meet his gaze. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. King Marcellus, as he was once known, ruled a vast and prosperous kingdom, yet his reign was overshadowed by his one great vice, vanity. From a young age, the king had been told he was the most beautiful creature to walk the earth. His mother, a queen of unmatched grace, had doted upon him, her only son, and filled his mind with praises of his divine beauty. As he grew older, his love for his appearance grew into an obsession. Every mirror in the palace was polished daily. Every reflective surface gleamed under the flickering candlelight. The king spent hours gazing into his reflection, admiring the perfection of his face, the symmetry of his features. He banished anyone who dared to be more beautiful than him from the court, exiling them to the farthest reaches of the kingdom. No one was allowed to outshine him. No one could be more admired than he was. One day, a traveling mystic arrived at the palace gates. He was a strange figure, cloaked in robes that shimmered in the sunlight, his eyes hidden beneath a hood. He asked for an audience with the king, offering a gift that would surpass all the treasures the royal family had ever known. Curiosity piqued, Marcellus allowed the mystic into his throne room. The mystic stood before the king, his voice as smooth as silk, but with an edge that felt like a warning. "Your Majesty, I have traveled far and wide, and I bring you a mirror unlike any other. It will reflect not only your image, but your very soul. Through it, you shall see the truest form of yourself." Marcellus, intrigued, demanded to see the mirror. The mystic produced a small, ornate hand mirror, its frame crafted from gold and adorned with delicate carvings of strange, twisting figures that seemed to shift when looked at directly. It was mesmerizing, the perfect symbol of his own beauty, the king thought. But the mystic's voice held an ominous undertone as he handed the mirror to Marcellus. "Be warned, Your Majesty, this mirror holds great power. Use it wisely, for once you look upon yourself in its glass, it will show you what you desire most, and what you fear most." The king, dismissing the mystic's cryptic words, snatched the mirror, eager to behold his own beauty reflected in its depths. He dismissed the mystic without a second thought, sending him on his way with a wave of his hand. Later that night, in the silence of his grand chamber, Marcellus lit a few candles and stood before the ancient mirror. He gazed into it, expecting to see the familiar perfection of his face staring back at him. At first, the mirror revealed exactly what he anticipated: his flawless visage, his ice-blue eyes, the smoothness of his skin. He admired himself as he always had, a smug smile playing on his lips. But then, something changed. The mirror's surface rippled, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a stone. His reflection began to twist, contort, as though the glass was alive, reshaping the image before him. Marcellus gasped as his features began to shift. His once perfect face grew gaunt, his eyes hollow and black. His skin sagged, deep lines etching across his cheeks and forehead. His beauty withered before his eyes, and in its place stood an ancient, decaying figure, a grotesque mockery of the king he once was. He recoiled, dropping the mirror, which clattered to the floor, but did not shatter. The reflection within, however, did not fade. Instead, it remained, staring back at him from the glass, its eyes burning with a malevolent hunger. Panicking, Marcellus tried to look away, but something about the reflection called to him. It was as if the mirror had awakened something within him, something dark and twisted. His vanity, his obsession with beauty, had been turned against him. The king stumbled back, but as he moved, so did the reflection. It climbed out of the mirror, slowly, deliberately, as though it had been waiting for this moment. The grotesque figure reached out a skeletal hand, its black eyes fixed on Marcellus. "No!" Marcellus screamed, backing away. "This isn't me. This isn't who I am." But the figure only smiled, a cold, cruel smile that mirrored the one Marcellus had worn so often. "It is you," it whispered, its voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "This is what you've always been, beneath the surface." Marcellus tried to run, but his feet seemed rooted to the floor. The reflection grew closer, its form becoming more solid with each step, until it stood before him, towering over the once beautiful king. "Please," Marcellus begged, his voice breaking. "I don't want this." But the figure's black eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "You wanted perfection," it said softly. "Now you shall have it, forever." With a swift, terrible motion, the reflection reached out and grabbed hold of Marcellus, pulling him toward the mirror. The king struggled, screamed, but it was no use. The reflection dragged him into the glass, trapping him within its twisted, nightmarish world. And in that moment, the curse was sealed. The Mirror King was no longer a man of flesh and blood. He was now a creature of the mirror, his soul forever bound to the reflection that had once been his greatest pride. He wandered the mirrored world, a prisoner of his own vanity, doomed to see his decaying form staring back at him for all eternity. In the days that followed, the palace servants found the king's chambers empty, save for the mirror lying on the floor. No one knew where the king had gone, and soon rumors spread throughout the kingdom. Some said he had disappeared, others whispered that he had been cursed. But no one dared look into the mirror for fear of seeing the same fate reflected back at them. The Mirror King's legend lived on, a cautionary tale of a man who desired beauty above all else, and in doing so, lost the very thing he cherished most, his soul. And so, the mirror was hidden away, locked in the deepest, darkest vault of the castle, where no one would ever dare look upon it again, or so they thought. For every now and then, when the moon is full and the night is still, a figure can be seen in the glass, an eerie reflection of a man long lost to time, his eyes hollow, his beauty gone, but his vanity still very much alive. And so, dear listeners, we've come to the end of tonight's visit to Luna's Crypt. But don't worry, there are always more stories waiting, tucked away in the shadows, just out of sight. You never know when one might creep up on you. If tonight's tales stirred your imagination, or perhaps kept you glancing over your shoulder, then you'll want to keep coming back. Every 2 weeks, we'll unlock the crypt once again, and who knows what new horrors might slip out. In the meantime, if you're hungry for more of the strange and mysterious, my collection of books is available on Amazon. Just search Luna Parnell, and you'll find plenty of dark delights to keep you company until our next meeting. Until then, sleep tight, if you can. And remember, sometimes the things we try to forget are the very things watching us the closest.